Welcome back to Long Delays Hobbies. Today I decided to begin a long-delayed project of my own, which is the War Mûmak of Harad. We're going to start with the base, and I'm going to be posting updates on the other two parts of the miniature, which is the Mûmak himself and his howdah later. You see I've left space to put the Mûmak and as well as some magnets in the base so I can work on later and not waste my time painting those parts of the miniature. We're going to start by basing the mud or ground of the miniature with some Thondia Brown. I just used a large brush, the largest brush that I thought was worthwhile, and I just went all over the miniature, the vast majority of this miniature, with some Thondia Brown. To be honest, I just went straight out of the pot because thinning would be kind of a waste of time. Would have probably doubled the amount of time I spent on this already lengthy project. Even going straight out of the pot, there are parts where I needed to thin it down, and you can see the finished project looks pretty nice. I'm going to now go over the horses using some Mournfang Brown. Now I used an air paint variety. So I just went over all the horses. We went around their saddles and reins and other leather bits of the horses. These horses are, because they are deceased, they are sprawled out in kind of awkward positions. So I just wanted to make sure that I was actually only painting the horses and not the various capes and cloaks and other bits. So this is when you're painting the horses, it is kind of a rather time-consuming process to make sure that you're painting what needs to be painted and not other bits. I also used Mournfang Brown for the leather belts of the Rohan warriors, which is it's not really going to be visible now, but you will see it later on in the video. So I'm now going to paint the cloaks of the dead Rohan warriors using Deathworld Forest. This is kind of a yellowish green that I used in my own Rohan painting scheme. I do that so I can have two different greens in my Rohan. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice I did make a mistake right here. This is actually the part that I'm painting is a banner. So I had to go back over this later and paint with Caliban Green. Now, if you're painting your banners and your cloaks the same color, then it won't matter. But I use different colors. So just bear in mind, if you're differentiating the banners and the capes, then just keep that differentiation in mind here. So now I'm going to paint all the various leathers and straps that are in many parts of this miniature. The Rohan warriors have different leathers. Some of them have leather armor. They almost all have leather wrist gauntlets. They have leather shoes. The horses, of course, have leather reins. The Mordor orcs had leather shields, and so there's a couple of those in the model. The leather saddles will need to be painted. So just go on a little scavenger hunt and see if you can find all the little bits of leather and make sure that those are painted with Rhinox Hide. So there's lots of little bits of metal, as this is a battlefield. So I just went through after the leathers and found all the little swords, spear points, and painted those with Leadbelcher Air. And those aforementioned spears, don't forget that they will need to be painted as well. I used a different color of brown to paint those, so I used Dryad Bark. Next up, I'm going to paint the little red bits of cloth that are on our Rohan warriors, as well as the fallen Mordor orcs. And for that, I used Khorne Red. There's quite a bit more red on the orcs than there is on the Rohan warriors, but just make sure you don't forget the red on the Rohan warriors as well. For the tunic of the Rohan warriors, I have an example here of a foot model. I used Doombull Brown. It's like a leathery reddish brown that I use. It's normally a layer paint, but I found that it works really well as kind of a orangey brown mid-tone. So that's going to be for their undercloth. For the rocks, I just went and found as many as I could and painted them with Mechanicus Standard Gray. I found out later that I missed a couple. This is a very long and intensive process. By the way, it's a massive base, and it's not a big deal. I went back and I found them later, and I got out my painting pot again, and I corrected it. And for that Rohan Warrior blonde hair, I went and picked out with some Zandri Dust Air paints. So this is kind of a dirty blonde look color, which I've found is nice to put it as a base coat for your Rohan Warriors. And now we're going to paint the flags and banners and so forth, as well as the saddlecloth of the cavalry. So we're going to use Caliban Green for that. Wooden parts of the shields were also painted in Caliban Green. And for the blue cloth on the orcs, I used Macragge Blue, in large part because I wanted it to be very clear which ones were orcs and which ones were Rohan warriors, so I gave them a red and blue paint scheme. And speaking of the orcs, I wanted to give them a bluish green skin tone, so I used Incubi Darkness. Now there are 2 arrows on this model. To paint the fletching on the arrows, I used Gray Seer. There are gold details on this model, especially on the gold hilts, the little bits in the centers of the shield, bits on helmets and so forth. I painted that with Retributor Armour. And finally, we're going to use some Ulthuan Grey Air, and that's going to be used to pick out the designs on the fallen Rohan shields. Alright, we have finally completed the base coating of this miniature. We're now going to move on to washing. I used Agrax Earthshade to wash the entirety of the Thondia Brown bits, the ground. I also used it on the Dryad Bark. I used it on one of the horses just to give him slightly different tones so they didn't all 3 look the same. And the leathers, such as the Rhinox Hide and the Doombull Brown. Just grab as big a brush as you can find and go to town. And for the Rohan Warriors cloaks, I washed those in Athonian Camoshade. I then went over all of the skin of the Rohan warriors with some Reikland Fleshshade. I also used Reikland Fleshshade on all of the gold bits to give it a little bit of a burnished look. And now we need to go over our metals with some Nuln Oil. I try not to be too heavy-handed here because I don't really like metallics that have lots and lots of black wash on them. I also use some Nuln Oil with when I'm going over the rocks, but same thing, I try not to be too heavy-handed because I still want them to look like rocks and not gray matter with lots of black wash all over it. And I'm now going to go over the little green flags with some Biel-Tan Green. And for the orc skin and the blue cloth in the orcs, I used Drakenhof Nightshade to wash that. And I used just a little bit of Carroburg Crimson on the severed arm, to make it more clear that this is a freshly severed arm. Get a little bit of gore on your Middle-earth miniatures. I used some Cygor Brown contrast on the hooves as well as the tail and mane of the horses to give them a little bit of differentiation and contrast so that they weren't just one solid single color. And we're done with washes, so let's go into highlighting. I'm going to start with some Doombull Brown. This is a good highlighting color for leathers. We're going to go over the Rhinox Hide. And anywhere there's a brown leather bit, I just went over with some Rhinox Hide. So like the leather armor, the saddles, the reins. I just did just a little bitty line with some Doombull Brown. And I'm now going to highlight our fallen Rohan warriors cloaks with some Loren Forest. There's quite a few lines and folds and so forth in these cloaks, so it doesn't take a lot to bring out the light. And I'm now going to highlight the reds of both the orcs and the Rohan warriors with some Wazdakka Red. Alright, we're going to now touch up the blue bits of the model with some Alaitoc Blue. A little bit will go a long way. You don't really need to go too heavy-handed with the Alaitoc Blue. And we're going to touch up the brown cloth with Skrag Brown. I use this to highlight the Doombull Brown cloth as well as the Mournfang Brown cloth. as well as the horse. Little bits of horse hair, his horse nose that I had painted previously. And now we're going to highlight our green banners and saddlecloth with Warpstone Glow. And I wanted to draw a little bit of woodwork on the back of the upturned shield that's kind of in the middle of the base. So I used Gorthor Brown to just draw some straight lines, more or less following the sculpted design that's already on the shield. And I used Tallarn Sand to highlight the hair that's kind of sprawled out of the Rohan warriors and bring out that dirty blonde look. And last but not least, let's not forget our rocks. I used some Dawnstone Air and dry brushed that over top of all the rocks I could find, and just to brighten them up just a little bit more. And now you can see the finished product. There are quite a few different colors and so forth on the base, so I do think it ended up looking pretty well with our Rohan and Orc warriors and different swords and shields and horses just scattered all throughout the base. Now, could I have possibly gone even further, got an extra highlight here or there? Yes, I certainly could have, but I did decide that at the end of the day, I am going to be just putting a Mûmak on top of this base. So I decided that this was a good stopping point. We'll be posting some updates when I am done with the Mûmak. So for right now, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.